What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. From Mtg, we like magic, and today we're going to talk about the best cards in Dominaria. There's no doubt that Dominaria is a really good-looking set. Like, in the end, I think I'm looking forward to this set more than any set since, like, Time Spiral, which is kind of a big deal. So, it's been a while since Time Spiral came out, but in terms of constructed playability, there's a bunch of nasty cards in this set. And whether that's because Richard Garfield was on the design team, he's the guy that created the game, he's the whole reason we're here, and his inclusion usually makes for a good set, or maybe it was because of the inclusion of the play design team. You know, that's why they're here, and they really did their job this time. I think because of a bunch of different factors, they pulled it together, knocked it out of the park. The set looks so good that not only am I going to give you my 20 rares, my top 20 rares and mythics in the set, but I'm also going to give you my top 5 commons and uncommons. So we got a journey to go on. Looking at another half-hour video here, let's go ahead and get started with my honorable mentions for the commons. Shivan Fire. Spittin' Fire. The whole reason that this is my honorable mention instead of being actually in the top 5 commons is because it may have to wait on rotation. That's what people say, but I think there's an argument for this card right now. Yeah, Shock and Magma Spray in the format, I'll give you that much. Those are pretty decent burn spells, but it's pretty sweet when your 1-mana burn spell can already take out, like, a lot of really relevant stuff in the format, but once you can kick this takes out like 85% of the relevant creatures in the format, including important stuff like Glorybringer and Shalai. We'll talk about that later. We'll also talk about Verax Bladeway later. This helps take that down when you can kick it. Godfarer's Gift tokens, Scarab God tokens. You know, Chandra has already proven that, you know, a 4 toughness is kind of a benchmark in this format, and since we have something else that can now, you know, reliably hit for, you know, 4 toughness creatures in red. Yeah, we had cut to ribbons, but I think this looks a lot more reliable, especially in control decks. The instant speed is super good, so I really like a lot about this card. I don't even know that it has to wait on rotation to see play in the right decks. In case you didn't know this, a burn spell that scales like this is really, really good, always. My number 5 common in the set is Syncopate. I think this will mean a lot for control decks, especially after rotation. Right now, we're seeing a lot of Torrential Gearhulks, and this isn't really something you can cast out of the graveyard with Gearhulks. That might, you know, hold up its seeing play for a while, but Syncopate's always been good. These X counterspells are great. Clash of Wills was great last time it was in the format, especially if the control deck gets to go first. This is just a removal spell against whatever they're trying to do on turn 2. Which is fantastic, you know, and in the late game, it scales really well. If they're trying to cast 4, 5, 6 mana stuff, let's say, then you're probably going to have all the mana required to keep them from casting those spells with a late Syncopate. Don't underestimate the Exile Clause either. Syncopate's probably going to be a pretty impactful common. The number 4 common in the set is Blink of an Eye, just because I tend to really like draw on a bounce spell. You know, bounce is kind of the redheaded stepchild of removal. They get their card back, but you still lose your bounce spell in a way, so it's like card disadvantage. You know, tempo decks like to run bounce. It's usually not a control thing, but once you staple a draw spell to it, it becomes a lot more of a control spell. Making sure that you don't lose a card in the exchange is very important for control decks. Not only that, but they get to save some of their stuff. Torrential Gearhulk, or maybe they have a Teferi out or something. You can not only save your permanent, but draw a card in the exchange, which is a blowout in a control deck. So this is versatile, and it's not necessarily card advantage, but again, not losing, quote-unquote, your spell when you play a bounce spell is actually really, really good. This is a fantastic common. My number 3 common in the set is definitely Saproling Migration. I'm excited to get my hands on this thing and test around. Not only does this look good in green-white tokens, but it obviously looks good in the black-green Saproling deck that people are apparently really excited about seeing. So it's a fun-looking deck, don't get me wrong. You know, Slimefoot looks like an awesome card. There's some cool stuff in that deck, but this is going to be a central piece in it, and possibly even the green-white tokens deck again, you know. Decks that play Anointed Procession look like they want to play this. There was already a deck in the format playing a 4 of Servo Exhibition, 4 of SRAM's Expertise, and they could definitely find room for another 2 mana, make 2 guys spell, especially one that scales really well. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on this. It looks like a good card. Number 2 is Skirk Prospector, and this could be number 1 because it could have an impact on Modern. I'm not super sold on that, but having another 1-mana ramp creature in the format, we'll get to the other one in a second, could actually be kind of important. Yeah, you lose your Skirk Prospector if you want to play a 3-mana spell on turn 2, but it sometimes might be worth it. And starts of Skirk Prospector into Wily Goblin look pretty threatening to me, so I'm excited to see what we can do with this card in Standard, especially once we see more goblins. I think it might be a thing. And of course, Modern playability, Pauper playability, definitely possible. But my number one common in the set could actually be the number one card in the set, and I've already seen it at number one on Mike Sigrist's list. This is Llanowar Elves, obviously. You know, if I'm going to point out all the best commons, I think number one has to be Llanowar Elves, because again, this could just be the most impactful card in the set, period. I don't have to say much else, honestly. Wizards was a little bit scared of 1 mana ramp in Standard for the last few years. You know, they were talking like we'd never get it back, and obviously it looks really impactful with the stuff we already have in Standard, but there's cards in this set that this looks super dope with and could totally warp Standard. Maybe mono green is a thing again, maybe Elves are a thing again, especially after Core Set comes out. This could obviously even go in 2 and 3 color decks. Just a 1 mana ramp guy is really impactful. Even in a set full of Magma Spray, Shocks, Fatal Push, Shivan Fire, just looked at that. Tons of stuff that can take this down. I still don't think the format is quite prepared for the impact that an Elf will have. But now we're into the uncommons. I'm trying to fly through these, in case you hadn't noticed. But my honorable mention in the uncommon slot is definitely Untamed Cav. Yeah, there are 5 cards I want to talk about more than this, but I do still think this deserves its moment. You know how I was just talking about how mono green could be a thing again? Boom, there you go. But just like Llanowar Elves, this could also go in 2 and 3 color decks. Now, I don't like that it's not necessarily a value creature. In a way, it's the opposite of a value creature. You know, if you kick this into play, they can still fatal push it, and you ultimately didn't get any value off of it. Yes, they can do that. Kind of sucks. So there's plenty of removal that can still take this down. Cast Down is a card now. We'll get to that a little bit later. Take this down for 2 mana, even if you kicked it. So I think there are just enough answers in the format that this isn't super broken or anything, but it still looks like a pretty hot card, whether you're playing it for 2 mana on turn 2 in a mono green stompy deck, or you're playing it for all 5 a little bit later. You know, this is an imposing creature, one way or the other, and if you can increase its power in any way, even if you played it for 2 mana, that seems like gravy to me. So Untamed Cav will probably have some sort of impact eventually, even if it's not right out of the gate. I will say, if there's a mono green stompy deck that exists in Standard and is actually the real deal, Cav is definitely going to be part of it. So I got to bring him up. This is definitely a hot uncommon that could have just as easily been rare. My number 5 uncommon in the set is Dauntless Bodyguard. This might actually be the best Savannah Lions we've ever seen. We just saw the best Savannah Lions we've ever seen, right? Like Sky Marcher Aspirant was in the last set. Now we get this. I mean, White is looking really aggressive at the 1-drop slot, and I like that. You know, we have 8 different Savannah Lions now in Standard, and that's looking really good for mono-white aggro decks to get way up under almost anything else. I tend to like, you know, these really aggressive small creatures that still have some sort of, you know, good function when you top deck them. And this definitely has that. So I'm into Dauntless Bodyguard. Can't wait for it to make waves, because it will. My number 4 is Merfolk Trickster. This could also see modern play, obviously, in the Merfolk deck. It could just as easily not. I've seen lots of arguments back and forth on the internet about whether or not this actually makes the cut in modern Merfolk, but you at least got to bring up that it could. And in Standard, this is just a hot creature, you know? It comes down and enables double blocks and stuff. Makes creatures like Hazoret lose indestructible. That's when you initiate the double block. So there's just so much that this can do. And it's also, like, sort of, kind of, a removal piece in blue, especially aggressive blue decks like Merfolk. So I think this is going to have a home in Standard and in Modern, maybe. You know, there's the interaction with Tarmogoyf everyone's talking about. You plunk this down to block a Tarmogoyf, it'll kill the Tarmogoyf because it makes a Tarmogoyf a 0/1. Seems pretty hot. There's plenty of cute interactions with this that make it playable, so I think it'll see play somewhere at some time. It's just too good of a card not to. My number 3 uncommon is Seal Away. There is a removal piece ahead of this on the list, but Seal Away is looking incredibly good for Standard play. People are saying that it's probably correct just to play 4 of these in White decks, especially like approach decks and control decks that carry White. Probably correct to play all 4, and honestly, I'm probably on that train too. You know, just a ridiculous spell, you know, basically an assassinate for 2 mana. At instant speed, which is where you want to be, especially against aggressive decks in the early game. And White didn't have a whole lot of answers before this. Yeah, they had Baffling in, but the instant speed is going to make all the difference, especially against the decks that Control hates the most. So Seal Away is going to be impactful for the next couple of years that it's in Standard. Get used to it now. This is a great card. The number 2 uncommon is Cast Down. I think this is just a little bit more relevant than Seal Away because it's definitely more possible for this to see modern play than Seal Away. I don't think it's definitely going to see modern play, but again, definitely more relevant than Seal Away for a format like modern. So it's going to get my number 2 slot here. I definitely think you could still play this in Standard, though. There is no doubt that you might want to jam 2 copies of this in a controlled deck that carries black, just because there's there's no doubt there's still a wide variety of targets that this can hit. And my number 1 is Dampening Spear, but you probably knew that. You know, I would imagine you knew that. This is probably would be in my top 10 cards or even top 5 cards in the whole set if I incorporated cards onto the main, or uncommons onto the main list. You know, Dampening Spear is just obviously ridiculous against Tron and supports my conspiracy theory that Tron lands will be reprinted in core set. I'm aiming for it. You know, Dampening Spear would be a great tool against them, but it's a good tool against other stuff in all formats at this point. You know, but it's good against Storm in Modern. It's good against obviously Tron in Modern, but there's even weird edge interactions, like if they try to play Torrential Gear Hulk. You know, if they go to play the free spell out of the graveyard, they still have to pay a mana for it. And that's kind of neat. There's a lot of edge interactions people are discovering with Dampening Spear that could be relevant, but just for the fact that it takes down one of the more annoying and best decks in an entire format, Dampening Spear's got to be number 1. But we finally made it to the main list. Here are my top 20 rares and mythics in Dominaria. Strap yourself in. We'll hit the ground running with my honorable mention, Lich's Mastery. Gotta bring this card up. People were surprised this didn't make the Sleepers video, and that's because I was saving it for the main list. Even as an honorable mention, though. Just because people haven't quite solved this riddle yet. What does it do? What does it go in? Is it the linchpin of a deck? You know, is it the whole point of a deck? Or is it just a supporting card in a control deck? Lich's Mastery is just such an obviously powerful card with a lot of hoops as far as deck building that you'll probably have to jump through. But I think we can. Even if you just want to play one copy of Lich's Mastery in your deck, then you have access to Mastermind's Acquisition in that theoretical deck, and you just go search it up whenever you need it. So I don't think there's actually too high of an opportunity cost at the end of the day. Or at least as high of one that people are saying. So if Lich's Mastery can actually work, if some genius deck building mind can figure it out, then maybe it'll be one of the best cards in the set, but I'm not ready to say it just yet. My number 20 card in the set, let's get things started here, is Squee. Believe it or not. I'm not too high on this, but I'm not ever going to discount a card that can't die. You know, whether they exile this or they just put it in your graveyard somehow, it's coming back, and that's good for all kinds of reasons. Whether you've got a sacrifice-based deck, maybe an Aristocrats thing going on, a deck where you want to discard a bunch of cards because you're playing Cathartic Reunion or Champion of Wits or whatever. This is probably pretty decent. Easy card to discard and get right back. That's fine. Or it's just good against all the exile removal in the format right now. Vraska's Contempt, Seal Away, Cast Out, all that stuff. This is really fantastic against. So it just doesn't die. Really annoying for control decks. Great sacrifice fodder. Good discard fodder. There's just all kinds of decks that want this thing, or an effect like this at the very least. So I think Squee at least has to be mentioned. My number 19 is the Weatherlight. And yeah, I'll put the word "the" on there. It just feels like it should be the Weatherlight. But who cares? But in any case, I don't see this being the most impactful card in the set. Obviously, it's down here at number 19, but I still felt it was worth talking about, and there are reasons for that. You know, right now, I think 5 toughness is a pretty good benchmark in the air in Standard. Yeah, Lyra Dawnbringer swings through this, but not a whole lot else will, especially cards people are playing that we know of. Aethersphere Harvester, Rekindling Phoenix, Glorybringer, 90% of the flyers people actually play in Standard. This just brick walls, and if you actually can get it through for damage, the effect is ridiculous. So the card is pretty decent at 4 mana, but there's so much competition at 4 mana. You kind of have to wonder if it's going to end up seeing play ultimately. But it's got a couple of years to do so, so it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in its lifespan it was one of the better cards in Standard. Card advantage on a big flying body? Yeah, you like that. My number 18 is Jorah, just because this looks so abusable. This is a Standard channel for the most part. You won't hear me pimping cards because they're amazing in Commander all the time. There are channels for that, and I like Commander as a format. I think it's really, really fun. I even like Brawl. I like singleton formats. But you won't often see me wait a card for Commander. But Jorah is in that camp a little bit, because I think she does so much in Commander, whether she is your general or she's just in the 99 somewhere. Obviously, this can lead to tons of card advantage in a long game, but I don't count that out from being a desirable ability in a constructed, competitive format either. Something like Standard, this could be pretty good. It's a removable body that can be removed at far less of a cost than you paid for it, and I'm always a little bit wary of that. Unless you have something you can cast the turn it comes into play, it doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play. I'm wary of that. I know that there are things about the card that aren't amazing, but if you can get the card to pop off and even draw 1 to 2 cards off of it, I think it's probably worth playing in your deck. And if you can draw a fistful of cards off of it, it's obviously worth playing in your deck. My number 17 is Naru Mae. There were people a little surprised this didn't make the sleepers list either, but I just think that it's good enough. I really do. I know that some people don't think that spending all the mana in the world to copy a spell is great, but I think that spending 5 mana to copy, a Fatal Push is probably good enough. 5 mana to copy a Wizard's Lightning is probably good enough, I think that even 6 mana to copy, a Harness Lightning or a Lightning Strike, that's also probably good enough. So I just don't think that there's as intensive of a mana investment as people think there might be when looking at Naru Mae, especially in control decks. As long as control decks can play a flash creature, they will. So as soon as Torrential Gearhulk rotates out of the format, this might be the second coming of Torrential Gearhulk. Yeah, it's not quite as good. I'm not saying that it is, but still, instead of getting a card out of your graveyard, you get extra value on a card that you're currently casting with flash, and on at least a decent body. And if you are running extra wizards, then, a flash anthem is a pretty big deal too. So there's just so much I like about Naru, whether you're playing an aggressive wizard shell or you're actually in a control deck with a bunch of cheap spells. Even if you just copy an opt for 5 mana, I could see that being good. So I kind of like Naru. My number 16, all the way up here at 16, you guys, is Multani. Yet another thing that people were like, why isn't this a sleeper? I think it's good enough. Again, this may have to wait some amount of time. 6 mana is so much, and that's why it's all the way down here. 6 mana is so much. But you know what it's not that much on? A recursive creature. If you build this in a deck where you expect the game to go long anyway, a grindy deck that's trying to get advantage over a long game, then this is a fantastic card. There's really not much they can do about it other than exile it. And creatures like that tend to be very, very good in competitive standards. So I just wouldn't put it past Multani to see play at some point in his life cycle. It just looks really good to me. Recursive creatures always good, especially creatures that scale like this thing. Multani can end up being like a 10-10 if you play him super late, or even bigger than that. So this thing looks great. And, by the way, there are reasons why you might want to return lands to your hand if he's in your graveyard. There are all kinds of tricks with this outside of just getting a huge recursive threat. So yeah, I kind of like Multani a lot, and I think he's got more of a chance than just being a sleeper. I think this is just a strictly powerful card. Number 15 is another 6-mana creature, actually, Demon Lord Belfenlock. His casting cost puts him all the way up here too, but I will say he's a step or two at least ahead of Multani as far as what I can tell. With this, you get immediate value, so at the very least, it's a value creature. Demon Lord actually has a chance of seeing real play even at his casting cost, because at the very least, at his floor, he replaces himself. Any better than that, and he'll give you extra cards, or he'll just fly over for like 12 damage in a game and just close things out for you. Flying and Trample on a 6/6 for 6 mana is actually a pretty great rate, especially with an ability like this. So I definitely think he'll probably see play, if nothing else, as a one-of in a deck or two down the line, but he has the potential to be way stronger even than that. But my number 14 is Dargah, because I got to knock out all these big, stupid, expensive creatures while I can, But Dargah, as far as big, stupid, expensive creatures in Dominaria, I think has one of the best shots at seeing constructed play, man. This is just so dumb, and you don't even have to pay its casting cost. Obviously, I think this is like the best reanimation target, bar none, in the entire format right now. Just huge power toughness and gets to swinging as soon as he hits the battlefield. So whether you're using Yawgmoth's Vow Offering, which is in the sleeper video, or you're using something more established like Liliana, whatever you're trying to do, reanimating this is really good looking to me. So can't wait to try some stuff with Dargah. To be honest, already have, and this is a pretty stupid creature. So I fully expect this to make Reanimator a real deck type again at some point in Standard. My number 13 is Traxos, a card I have a lot of hope for, but I'm also trying to be realistic about. I don't think that this is the best creature in the set. I know a lot of people are super high on Traxos. I know it's a 4-mana 7/7 trample, and to be honest, I think the trample does put it on the list. The trample is a sly ability. It's easy to miss it, but the trample is really, really important on this. Usually big things like this at a low casting cost, they just chump block forever. That's their downside, but you don't have that with Traxos. You can easily get in tons of damage really fast, so long as you have ways to untap it. And I think you will. In a lot of decks that it's in, there's plenty of legends. That's what this whole set is about. So, and that's not even just legends, you can cast an artifact on the next turn, untap this. So I think there are tons of ways to enable it, but a braid is still really very, very important in this format. Yeah, there's sideboard naturalizes and all that. These are realistic concerns, and Traxos does have to worry about that. And you have to enable it. You know, there's, again, a high opportunity cost to this because a lot of your other deck building has to concede to this card. You have to pack your deck full of things that actually enable this. And that kind of brings me down on it a little bit, but at the end of the day, a 4-mana 7/7 trample that any deck can play looks pretty dumb. My number 12 is Benelli Marshal. Believe it or not, I think that this just has relevance in so many different decks. Even at the 3 white mana casting cost, that it goes on the list at somewhere. It's just a little bit of speculation right now that White Weenie is going to be a thing again. You know, the mono white aggro deck that goes really, really low. Again, we've got 8 Savannah Lions in this format and some good 2-drops too. So this thing could really just be the coup de grace. You drop this Anthem effect. If they can't answer it immediately, you could just win the game very, very early, or at least put them way, way down. So I'm liking this card, not only in mono white aggro, but even in green-white tokens. Let's say you cast a SRAM's Expertise and you cast this as your free card off of that expertise. That looks like a really stupid thing to do, you know? So I like Benelli Marshal a good bit, and I think it's got relevance in enough decks that it could actually really have a shot at seeing play, especially considering it's got so long to do so. Maybe after rotation, but even right now, this could be an impactful card. But my number 11 is Goblin Chamberlain. I actually think that right now, and that's what puts it so high up on the list, right now in Standard, this is the most impactful of all of the, three of a respective color cards, that whole cycle in Dominaria. And it's going to kill all the, slow, or the mono white aggro creatures that I've been talking about this video. It's going to kill all of them. It's going to kill the tokens I've been talking about this video. It's going to kill Glintsleeve Siphoners, Champion of Wits, opposing Bomac Couriers, Earthshaker Kenras, Fanatical Firebrands. There's a ton of X1s in this format. This is going to completely take out for you the turn you drop it. You can easily 2-for-1, Legion's Landing tokens and stuff, and then other small creatures that they might have out the turn you play this. Plus, it's an aggressive body. 3 mana for a 3/3 first strike is going to win a lot of early combats. So I like so much about this that I think it has a lot of relevance in the present moment. And that's why it's all the way up here. But we've hit the top 10, and my number 10 is Rexian Scriptures. I'm also not all the way sold on this, even though it's in the top 10, but it does make the top 10 by the skin of its teeth, just because you can't ever discount a sweeper, and this does look like a pretty good sweeper, even if they have a turn to prepare for it. Now, obviously, this also sets you up for the Wrath. Yeah, they know not to play any creatures the next turn, which is actually good. People have been saying, just a small aside here before I make the point I was going to make, but in any case, people have been saying like, oh, they have a turn to prepare for the Wrath. Well, you know how they prepare for the Wrath? They just don't play creatures. You time walked them, which is really good against an aggressive deck. I don't necessarily think that's all negative, But the point I was going to make is that this also lets you prepare for it by making sure that at least one of your creatures survives it. And all of your creatures could survive it if you're playing artifacts, and that's not even hard. Like Scrap Heap's Crowners in the format. It's a ridiculous artifact that's more or less on color with Scriptures. So I think multiple creatures could survive this really easily on your side, and one-sided sweepers are great. I think that earns a top 10 slot, and let's also point out the fact that that's not all this card does. Yeah, it saves a creature, blows the rest of the board away, but it also blows graveyards away a turn after that, which is, I think, really important. There's a ton of stuff that they might want to embalm or eternalize, but they don't quite have the mana for yet by the time this goes off. And yet, does let their Scarab God come back, and they can play their Scarab God, but unless they have all the mana in the world, they're not going to get to use its activated ability before you just obliterate their graveyard. So I think there's a lot of cool things in the current Standard about Scriptures. This definitely has a chance. My number 9 is History of Benelli. I am just as high on this as a lot of players are. I've seen a lot of people ask questions about this. Whenever a pro player tweets about it or writes an article about it, there's inevitably somebody that has to ask them, like, why do you think this card's so good? It doesn't look like much to me. Here's the deal. White now gets its value creature, Green has had a value creature like Rogue Refiner before it got banned, and then it had Jade Light Ranger after that. There's a ton of value creatures in other colors too, things like Glintsleeve Siphoner, and other things with Enter the Battlefield triggers, Those are really dangerous because even if they get removed, you get some kind of value off of them. Same thing with History of Benelli. It acts like a value creature. When it enters the battlefield, you get your 2/2, and then if they don't remove History, you get another 2/2. That's pretty good value right there, but that's not all the value you get off of it. You also get a ridiculous Anthem effect that makes this card effectively put 8 power into play at the very least by the time it's all said and done. You only get that for one turn, but in an aggressive deck, that's all you're going to need. Now, if they can remove history on their next turn or at the end of your turn or whatever, then you still at least got a knight out of it. Yeah, it's a 2/2, but still, acts kind of like a valued creature. And if you get any more value out of that, it's disgusting. If this was just a 3-mana creature that was a 2/2 and put another 2/2 into play when it ETB'd or on the next turn or whatever, I think that might be a good enough creature. But at this point, you not only get that value, but the thing that's actually creating the creatures is really, really tough to deal with. Enchantments are the most reliable permanent type, maybe in all of Standard at this point. They're really difficult to remove compared to other permanent types. So this is almost always going to give you the 2 creatures and the huge, boost, the big anthem effect at the end. And if you even have just, 1 or 2 other knights on the battlefield at, when this does go off and get that 3rd lore counter, you're dealing so much damage, and this even looks like a decent top deck. It doesn't have to be played on curve, but when it is, it's filthy. Just, there's so much to like about this card, and it actually makes knights a scary deck. People were just looking at knights like it was a Rivals of Ixalan tribe, but with a card like this, it's actually a nightmare scenario to have to deal with 4 knights on the battlefield and this thing ticking down with no sweeper in your hand. You're going to have to deal with that, kid. History of Benelli, it just does so much and it's so hard to deal with while it's doing those things. I think it's definitely in the top 10. Number 8 is Shalai. This card looks great too, man. Like, White got a lot of good pieces in the set. It's not the last White card we'll talk about either, And Shalai, White probably needed the bump, to be honest. Shalai is a fair card, though. It's not like this is the best card in the set, obviously. They can still deal with it. They still get to target it. They just can't target anything else. This is where Dauntless Bodyguard comes in. I was talking about that earlier. But there's also Blossoming Defense and a ton of other ways to protect this. If you need to, just negate and other counter spells. Seems like a decent plan with Shalai, So I don't really see much that I don't like about this, especially in tokens builds, Anointed Procession builds and stuff. If they can make room for another 4-drop, this might be it, just because this is maybe win more. But a 3/4 body in the air that can attack and block well is great. That, even the 6 mana ability can win super long grindy games very easily for you. This is a great mana sink to have in the late game. And just the ability to, basically, you don't entirely shut down Vraska's Contempt and other removal spells, but you at least get them off of other creatures, Even though they can Vraska's Contempt this, you still got a Vraska's Contempt out of their hand that they couldn't use to target your actual best creature on the battlefield. That enough is good enough, especially considering this is on a body that can do work on its own. My number 7 is Verax Bladeway. Note all the 4-drops on this list. I mean, we're already in enough competition at the 4-drop slot in Standard. But I think it's a really tough riddle to solve once we get into Dominaria Standard. There are a ton of ridiculous 4-drops, and this is one of them. I think that Phoenix will probably be the better choice, or at least the preferred choice. Who knows if it'll truly be better for a lot of decks, but once you do get into the late game, Verax is unbelievable, and he's just scalable. A 4-mana 4/4 flyer, that's a good deal. Nothing wrong with that deal. 7 mana for 2 4/4 flyers is a crazy deal, and will close out most games. Even if they do have a Vraska's Contempt or something, it's whatever, who cares? This really stretches their removal spells very thin and gives them 2 flying threats to deal with. In mid-range decks, this looks like a very good finisher, whether you're casting it early or you top deck it late. This is a ridiculous top deck, you guys. So this is good. Just based on the traditional grading scale, it's decent when you're behind. It's good when you're ahead. It's good in the late game, good in the early game. There's just not really too many bad things you could say about this card. And I think it will be an important threat at some point during its tenure. My number 6 is the enemy Checklands. It's a boring inclusion to the list, I know, but they got to be on here somewhere, and I think they have enough relevance in Standard right now that they got to be like this high up, This really gives a lot of decks a leg up. A lot of decks that didn't have the mana before, especially after Attune with Ether got banned. I think this gives Teamer a little bit more of a lease on life, or a new lease on life at this point. Enemy Checklands are just a great thing to have, and it's good that they got reprinted, period. Even if they don't see a lot of play in Standard, which they will, they'll see all the play, but even if they didn't, just hypothetically, theoretically, it's still good they're getting another printing because we needed to bring the price of these down. They were like $13 a piece, but these on pre-order are like $5.50, $6 a piece. A pretty decent price, and will really help bring the price down. We needed that. So one way or the other, I like the fact these were printed in the first place, and yeah, they'll see all the Standard play while they're in Standard, period. Go ahead and get them now, because you're going to need them for like 60% of the decks you build. And probably more. My number 5 is Lyra Don, the second coming of Baneslayer. I think she's that good. I really do actually think the hype is real about Lyra. Yeah, she costs 5 mana. She may have to wait on rotation, but I don't even want to go that far. It just has all the relevant keyword abilities. Yes, it costs 5, but once you get it down, it's a hoss. They have to answer it immediately or risk losing the game. It's a very real possibility. This is just the biggest, baddest flyer that we know is going to see tons of play in Standard. It's just impossible for a deck that can't answer this to win the game in some ways, because you're going up huge chunks of life, they're going down huge chunks of life every single turn. So it's just really threatening on attacks, really threatening on blocks, and probably does a lot of both. I don't think that it's all hype. I think it's very, very real. Number 4 is Teferi, all the way up here. This is another one where I think the hype is real. Honestly, I think this is probably the best Planeswalker that we've seen printed since Chandra, Torch of Defiance, which wasn't forever ago, obviously, but we've seen a bunch of Planeswalkers printed since then. And I think this is easily the best of all of those by a lot. People have compared it to Ob Nixilis, but I think it's way better than Ob Nixilis. You know, obviously it doesn't straight up remove creatures, but especially in control decks, that ability can be just as good as removal, especially considering it gives you a chance to draw the counterspell you'll need to actually counter whatever it was that you put back in their library. So I think that's a good enough ability. Drawing cards is always good, and the best ability on the card, I think, people are saying it's just a tech ability. I think it's the best ability on the card, is getting to untap those 2 lands when you do decide to draw. It just looks unbelievable. This is effectively a 3-mana Planeswalker once you have 5 lands out, and that is unbelievable in control decks, you guys. Getting 2 mana back gets you back on defense. You get to play Negate, Essence Scatter, Cast Out, Seal Away, Harness Lightning, Lightning Strike, Fatal Push. There's just every important removal spell south of Vraska's Contempt in your control deck. This puts you right back on as soon as you cast it. Helps protect Teferi. This card looks dumb. As far as Planeswalkers go, it looks dumb, and I haven't even gotten into the Ultimate, which can't win the game by itself. It's not like it makes creatures or does damage or anything, but I would imagine this will force a ton of scoops once it does go off. So Teferi just looks like a very impactful Planeswalker to me. The rest of the list, honestly, is just, yes, the hype is real cards. So we'll get to number 3, Mox Amber. You knew it had to be on here somewhere. You're probably waiting for it. It's actually in the top 3 as far as I can tell. Now, I know not everyone agrees with me, but I was prepared for that because whenever a new Mox comes out, people say it's bad. You might not know this if you haven't been playing for too long, or if you just don't remember this far back. Maybe you've forgotten this happened, but when Chrome Mox came out, so many people called that card bad. Even way back when Mox Diamond came out, so many people called that card bad. And those cards still see play and saw all the play in their standard environments. I don't think this is going to be any different, you guys. I really don't. Even if you don't have a legend out, by the way, this is relevant in strategies that need an artifact for whatever reason, or they want to improvise. It's going to improvise. Not to mention the ultimate fact, the most important takeaway from this being in the top 3, fast mana, 0 mana, fast mana is always good. You cannot stop it from being good, no matter how much you want to make it bad, no matter how bad you design the card. Fast mana like this is always good, and there's nothing you can do about that. There's already 3 lists I'm working on that abuse this ridiculously, plus a ton of other lists I've seen on the internet already. There's a coalition of people who are like, no, you guys, Mox Amber is real, and I am on that team. Mox Amber is very real. I'm not saying it takes over Standard the day the set comes out, but there are a ton of decks that utilize this way better than you think they do. Fast mana is always good. Say it with me. Fast mana is always good. It just is. Get it through your head. My number 2, we're all the way up here, number 2, is actually Steel Leaf Champion, another card I think the hype is that real for. With Mox Amber, there are enough naysayers that I'm like, maybe. Like, it makes you doubt yourself a little bit. Ultimately, I think that card is very real. But in any case, Steel Leaf, more people are on board with this for a reason. It's not just the Timmies either, man. There are spikes that are like, this is going to be one of the cards in Standard. If you wanted to make Mono Green a real deck again, this is it. And it didn't even have to be in a format with Llanowar Elves. But you guys, it's in a format with Llanowar Elves. You can cast this on turn 2 super easily. At which point it is the biggest, stupidest... Yeah, it's stupid. It's dumb. It's almost vanilla. That ability does matter early, by the way. A lot. But it seems almost vanilla, but it is that impactful. It's no Tarmogoyf or anything. It doesn't scale very well. obviously, at all, but still a 3-mana 5/4 is unbelievable, even if you get it down on turn 3. But if you can't enable it to come out on turn 2, it's just filthy. It's repugnant. Like this, if your opponent can't answer this, it's going to win the game, or at least end up winning the game. Even if your opponent can't answer it a turn 2 after that, it still will have gotten in 5 or 10 damage and will have led to you taking that game a lot of the time. So even if this swings profitably once, I think it goes a long way towards winning you the game. By the time you get to turn 4 or 5, you're still not going to be playing stuff as big as this. And like, God forbid, like double Steel Leaf Champion starts when you start with a Lana Werewolf in your hand are just going to be almost unbeatable. Yeah, you answer the first one. What are you going to do about the second one, Jack? Like, this is a very ridiculous creature for Standard. Even despite the restrictive casting cost, I am all in on Steel Leaf. I'm not saying it's going to be in every deck because it physically cannot. The casting cost is way too restricted, but it's going to be in decks that are important enough, like tier 1 decks, that I think it's probably one of the best cards in the set. Easily. Hands down, the hype is real on this one too. A creature this big this early in the game is frightening. But my number 1 card in the whole set, we've reached the end of the Yellow Brick Road, kids. It's Karn. And you knew that. You knew that. I would imagine since I haven't said his name at this point, he had to be number 1. This is another one, you guys. The hype is real on this. There are enough naysayers on Karn too that I'm a little surprised at it. What exactly do people not like about this? You get value off of it regardless. Yeah, it costs 4 of your mana, but any deck can play it. Any deck in the world that wants this gets this effect from here on out in Standard for a while. So that's good enough, but you get value off of it no matter what. You at least get to draw a card. And people keep saying like, oh, you get to draw the worst card. You get to draw the worst out of 2 cards. That could still be a very good card. And when the next turn rolls around, you get to draw the other card. It's not like it's gone forever. Like for 4 mana, drawing 2 cards over the course of 2 turns is already good enough, but this can also just win a game. Just win a game by making dudes, you know? What do you not like about that? People are discounting this last ability, and the last ability is actually great. You know, planeswalkers that protect themselves by making creatures or take over whole games by making creatures, that's good. That is good, you know? I can see this seeing play in the sideboard of aggro decks that want to go bigger after game 1. I can see this seeing play in every mid-range deck in the entire format, because that's what it's for, but I could even see this seeing play in control decks that want to play this with defense up on turn 6 or 7 when they have other untapped lands. They can counter anything you want to do about it, and from that point onward, they get to draw extra cards every single turn, and they have a creature factory. Literally every kind of deck could want this effect, so I just don't see why there are people putting this card down. It just looks like easily the most impactful card in the set to me. It could see Modern play, easily would not put it past seeing Modern play, but in Standard, there are tons of decks that are going to want this. Almost any deck wants something that draws cards and makes creatures at a relatively low investment for a card that does those things. So this Karn looks great, tough to remove for the most part, especially if you have some sort of protection for him. Artifact decks obviously want this card. It's very hard to name a deck that doesn't want this at any point during a match. So Karn just looks that good to me. He's definitely number 1 in my book. And that's my list. I think we finally made it through. This is probably another half-hour video, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me through these. And that means that we're actually really, really close to Deck Tech season, which is my favorite time of the year, and apparently all of yours, if the views are anything to be to go by. But Deck Techs are coming up soon, and there are some things I want to say about that before we get out of here. Now, there are a ton of decks in the upcoming Standard. It's the good kind of problem to have, where every time I go over the whole set, I think of different interactions and different decks I want to build, different stuff I want to do. But there are lots of decks that I want to build. So in the next couple of days, probably about the time I put this video out, which will be Saturday, I will have a Patreon poll out to decide what decks come first or what decks to prioritize at the very least. And it's going to be a huge poll with lots of different decks to vote on. So if you're already a $1 patron, make sure you go over there. Now's your cue. But if you're not a $1 patron, consider throwing $1 a month to the channel, and you'll get to pick what decks we focus on first when Dominaria starts very, very soon now. So if you're interested, there's a link in the description. Hop on over to Patreon. And remember that this video is brought to you in part by TCG Player, the New York boys. They're good folks, you know. They help me out, and they're actually where you can get all of these cards at the cheapest prices right now on pre-order. All of the prices that I listed in this video are market price on TCG Player, which tends to be actually, especially during pre-order season, way higher than you can actually order cards from TCG Player if you do a little bit of digging. A lot of these cards are, available to pre-order at a lower price than what I listed in the video. So click the first link in the description, hop over there, get what you want. Get hyped, Deck Tech's coming up super soon, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.